Hi everyone and welcome to my channel Hisame Artwork. In today's video we're going to continue the discussion of the cat language. This won the poll, you guys asked for it, and also which topics interest you more regarding it. So this is a conlang, a constructed language for a comic book series that I've created. It is a science fiction story, and the cat language is a Pidgin language combined with lol speak, which is another kind of Pidgin language usually used in cat memes. So that's how it is. Pidgin languages, for those of you that don't know, are derivatives of the English language that have been simplified and are used in various places around the world. So here's a little sample of it. I have here also the Australian dialect. So, oh hi there viewer. Today I will teach you how to speak like a cat from Niels Feynman's time traveling adventures. The sci-fi adventure comic written and illustrated by the Hisame the artist. So the purpose of this, for those of you that don't know, is world building. For my Niels Feynman comic series, I wanted to add a little bit of depth to it, make it more interesting. Conlangs are fun. People have also asked me about it and if I would do it, so I did do it. And also it is practice for my conlangs for my other stories, so I have this sci-fi opera with a lot of aliens, and I needed to do conlangs for that, and I decided, well, let's take baby steps, let's do something more simple before we get into more complicated stuff. And even this Pidgin language was a lot of work, so I do recommend, taking it easy because it is a lot of work, and to pace yourselves. Now, the way I see a lot of people do conlangs is they start with the writing and vocabulary and do a little bit on the surface and never get into it that deep. Because, how many stories are published, so how much time are you willing to invest to do something properly versus how useful it's going to be for your life. Now I am thinking this a bit more long term. I would like to animate these at some point. If you animate, then you have audio. Is not just a book, is not just a comic book, is no longer reserved to the visual medium. It becomes mixed media. So I am thinking this a bit more in depth that many of you might need. And then a lot of people will maybe go into the grammar and the culture, but all of these cannot exist, in my opinion, without the bedrock of the planet and the physics of your universe. So I've started with, the planet, the geography and climate, because that influences the anatomy. Then these things influence the history. You cannot have a culture without a background, without a history. And then you do like the top polish, which is the grammar and the writing and the vocabulary. Because if you are working with aliens, they'll have different anatomy. For example, I have some that are lizard-like, some that are bird-like, some that are salamander-like. So I'm thinking maybe they'll speak like dolphins, and then how you would go about doing that and having grammar and vocabulary and all of the other things associated with a language. What I have kind of figured out from doing some diving into biochemistry and things like that is that sooner or later, if you want to have an intelligent animal, it kind of needs to use tools, so it will have some appendages that can grasp tools. It's easier to work if you have something in front of you and you're working, therefore forward-facing eyes are very convenient. So sooner or later you will end up with something that looks vaguely humanoid. If they're speaking, they'll have some organs in their body that will generate sound. If they're communicating visually, like octopuses, then they'll have a different way to express themselves. And then how much of the body are you going to cover up, how much is not going to be covered up. And then you start getting a lot of questions, and you can get lost into this stuff. So just, take it easy, don't stress yourself. Allow yourself to adjust and edit and not rush into this. And another thing that you guys have asked me, you were curious about the history of cats in the science fiction world that I've created. For my ease and convenience of world building, I decided to go off of our world and just place it 300 years into the future. And the way I thought about it is that there's a cogito virus outbreak in the early 21st century that led to the feline age of enlightenment. This is kind of took inspiration from the rise of the Planet of the Apes. Like, humans were trying to find a cure for a disease for humans, and then it got to another species. In this case, I also have parallel universes. In another one, it's the rise of the Planet of the Raccoons. But for our story, it's with cats. I named the virus Cogito. This was over 7 years ago. I placed the outbreak in China 7 years ago, and lo and behold, it broke out with the COVID from China. But what I am more concerned about is copyright regarding the word cogito, because I'm taking so long to write the story. I'm almost certain at this point that somebody else has thought of this world and the word, and there are gonna be copyright issues. So if you don't know how convoluted this issue can be, the Wizards of the Coast had a legal battle with the Lord of the Rings estate over the words dragon and elf and hobbit. Now, Lord of the Rings owns the right to the word hobbit. That's why in Dungeons and Dragons they're called halflings. But they weren't able to copyright dragon and elf, fortunately, so everybody can still use the words dragon and elf. Not everybody can use the word zombie. I forgot which company owns the word zombie. But yeah, that's kind of how it is. At the moment, robot is not owned by anybody, but this may change, and I'm sorry for any of you that have used the word robot in your books, because you might run into issues trying to sell if the copyright to a certain word has gone out because of these silly copyright laws that are just absurd, and trademarks and so on. So the way I imagined the cat language is there were several languages that evolved from the Felidae family species, and they had like different sounds. And you have the cat genre, the panthers that include lions and leopards and tigers, and then you also have hyenas. They're also in the Felidae family. Yes, hyenas are not dogs, they're cats. And foxes are not cats, they're dogs, basically. That's the short of it. And then all of these species got influenced by native Homo sapien cohabiting the land. So they kind of saw what humans were doing with their languages, and they had to interact with humans. So there was a cross between cultural cross exchange between the two species, and this led to several proto-languages forming around the world. Now, all of this stuff is happening in the span of about 150 years. And cats live less than humans, so their generations pass faster. Because it is of this virus, they gave them a lot of enhancements like opposable thumbs, walking upright with limited ability. They're not as fast as or as resilient as when it comes to running as humans. Humans are pretty overpowered in certain sense. Because of our skin, we perspire so well. We're very good at regulating our internal body temperature, which lets us do more than, let's say, a cheetah or a tiger can do when it comes to physical exertion and endurance. So I'm still trying to keep a lot of this stuff for cats, not to just make them furry humans. I want them to actually be still very cat-like. So then we have the reform for the classical cat language and the lion language and the tiger language that came with the adoption of the human writing system. So, a couple of generations, while they're still living longer than they would as a normal feline in our world, they are still their generations are passing faster. They're able to adapt and absorb information faster than we would. And so they're adopting a lot of things that humans already have, let's say, perfected or made very useful to a high degree, such as writing systems. Like, we've worked out a lot of issues. And since cats, I imagine, are very practical and pragmatic and lazy, they're not gonna bother to do a lot of stuffs on their own. They're just gonna take a lot of human culture, co-opt it, because it's just simpler and easier and faster. So later I have the modern cat language and then the international big cat language, where a major push to standardize happened, and then you have the Latin alphabet becoming the official writing system for all Felis sapiens. So basically, like I said, pragmatic, the Latin alphabet is very widespread. I anticipate in 300 years is not going to be the Cyrillic or the Greek alphabet taking over the world. I doubt the Chinese one with its complicating writing system is going to be the number one. Unless they change it to something else, like the Japanese have a simplified writing system. Of course, the Koreans have their really awesome writing system that is very easy to use. But I imagine in 300 years the Latin alphabet is still going to be used a lot. And as you know, in medicine, Latin and Greek are used, and in programming, in robotics, and in AIs, English is the language of those science fields. So it's going to be interesting. I think that English is going to continue to be used 300 years from now. Also, because we have such a high level of alphabetization, that means that the language is kind of crystallizing. It's not evolving as much now that we have a standard for every language pretty much. English, the British English is the official one. That's the one that's mostly used and taught around the world. You don't do, if you're not in America, you're not gonna do American English. You're gonna do British English. Anywhere in Europe, in India, as far as I understand, that's the version you're learning in school. So, like I said, a lot of standardization, and cats are taking that as well. And in the 24th century, that was gonna bring the latest reform, and the contemporary cat language has absorbed the international big cat language, and now is the most intelligible with the English Pidgin dialect known as Lol speak. So basically, kind of all cats agreed, okay, fine, we're gonna use one language, we're gonna use the cat language. I sort of imagine that the bigger cats are going to be the more ferocious, aggressive, combatant, militaristic, and therefore less likely to do diplomacy and commerce. Therefore, the small cat language, the cat language, is going to be the one that's going to be used the most. And that's the way it is in a lot of cases, like which language wins out, either the one that defeats militarily and suppresses other cultures, or the one that's just easy to use, it's diplomatic, it's convenient, and it becomes the one that's most widely used. So I imagine that the smaller cats are going to be more diplomatic. They are to some degree domesticated and tamed. They have been living amongst humans, so they would have inevitably become the bridge between Homo sapiens and like the Panthera sapiens, something like that. So for the contemporary cat language, I have several dialects: Afric, Romeown, Oriental, Singapore, and the Australian we've discussed, and of course the archaic and the true speak. So I've made some flags here for the Australian dialect. As you can see, I have orange for the ground in Australia, green for the shrubs, and blue for the sky. And then because they are cats, not big cats, they have like a little paw without the claws. The official flag for all of them kind of was decided by the bigger cats, and they had like black for war and red for war, blah blah blah. And then you have the white from the smaller cats. They wanted peace and prosperity is gold, so they kind of had a consensus on how to do the flag and how to be represented. And then I have flags for all of the 5 major dialects and how should I say countries, nations, governmental organizations that need to represent themselves. So for the Afric dialect, I'm considering that it's going to be highly influenced by the Yoruba mostly, because that's like some of the most widespread and rich of the communities at the moment. What I envision the trajectory would be that would spread more. For Romeown is sort of like a Roman Latin language influence, so mostly from the southern part of Europe, the cats there. There are a lot of cats in Europe. Most of them seem to be widely appreciated and most numerous in Greece and Turkey, which do not speak a Latin language. However, what language becomes most dominant? The one that is most successfully, I imagine, economically, that will have like the most prosperity and the best chances of projecting soft power in a diplomatic way. So cats from Italy, France, Spain, these are already languages that are widespread around the world. People there would have cats that they would pamper financially, and so I imagine that dialect would kind of become the dominant one in Europe. I could be wrong. Maybe it would be German cats taking over Europe if it were to happen. But kind of the way I thought is Aristocats, they would be smooth diplomats and they would spread a Latin dialect. Oriental, I'm thinking that there are a lot of cats in the Middle East, but to be honest, I think that the Turkish cats would be more successful just because they're better diplomats, more numerous, more appreciated. Like I've never seen any country be as nice to cats as Turkey. I could be wrong. I have not visited every country in the world, but so far my impression from social media as well is that they're very loved there. So the Oriental dialect, I have not decided if it would be an Arab one or a Turkish one. I'm still thinking about that. I'll see in the second book with Niels Feynman's Time Traveling Adventures how I'm going to expand that. At the moment, I have a spin-off, the Strange Encounter series, and you can see some more text there. That is the Australian dialect, because the protagonist is from Australia. Well, he's in Oscatia, which is a micronation independent in Australia. They were granted land from the Australian government to set up their nation there and be safe and well. So that's kind of how I envisioned it. There are a lot of micronations in Australia. Australian government seems to be rather permissive and tolerant of that. They have a lot of empty space, I guess. So that's why I set it up there, because I thought, from a legal point of view, where would it be most likely to peacefully be allowed to set up an independent state? So you can see some samples of the cat language there. So for the Australian dialect, the characteristics, now we're going to get into the grammar part of it. It's going to be an SVO language, so subject, verb, object, because that's how English is, and I would like to keep it like that because the Australian dialect is most similar to English, and then the Romanian dialect maybe will be like more similar to Latin languages. I'll have to see. And if you guys have any feedback on it, like recommendations, I'm always open to hearing what you guys have to say about this language. Obviously, I didn't invent the cat language. The internet has. As far as I'm concerned, it's open source what I'm doing, and I'm happy to hear ideas. If you want to use this language, I have no problems. I do not own the English language. So another thing I want to do is to have no declension whatsoever in this dialect. So for those of you that don't remember from school, and I also teach languages, and what I've noticed is all of my English students, they don't remember this from school for some reason. My French students do, my Romanian students do. We say declinar. And so what it is that, how should I best describe this? You're changing words so it sounds better to you in your language. And every language does this differently. For example, in English, you only have declension for pronouns. So for example, in English, you say, she likes him. You don't say, she likes he. You say him, because it sounds better to you to say him. That is declension. For example, in Romanian, declension is done to the adjective according to the subject, but it's the subject's gender and if it's singular or plural. So for example, in English you say he's pretty, they are pretty, he's pretty, we're pretty, they are pretty. But in Romanian, no. There's a different pretty if it's a woman or a man, and it's a different pretty if it's one person or several people. So for example, ea e frumoasă, el e frumos, frumoasă, frumos, frumoși, frumoase. So you can see that there's a difference. Frumoasă, frumos, frumoși, frumoase. So that is declension in Romanian. In Japanese, the declension happens to the adjective according to the verb. This was pretty strange because no European language does this. So if it's past tense, it's going to be one form of pretty. If it's the non-past, because they only have two tenses, then it's going to be a different kind of pretty. So I don't want to complicate my life. No declension whatsoever according to anything. We're just gonna drop that. English barely has any declension. We can just give it up completely. You won't notice too much. So I also don't want any gender nouns or vowel harmonization. English doesn't have this anyway, so we don't have to bother with that, but I might do that for the other dialects, because it is something that happens For example, gender nouns are something that happens in every Latin language, and vowel harmonization is something that happens in Turkish. So, for example, if the Oriental dialect I decide to do it Turkish, then maybe I'll have vowel harmonization, but if I do the Oriental version, then maybe I'll do the gendered nouns. I'm definitely gonna have gendered nouns for the big cat language because there's a lot of sexual dimorphism in lions and hyenas. Like, I imagine that the lion language and the hyena language are gonna be heavily gendered because it's such a big part of their biology and behavior. So I just imagine that it's gonna be an issue that carries on into the future of their culture and their behavior. Whilst cats, there are obviously gender differences. You can just look at a cat's face and guess pretty reliably if it's a boy or a girl, but just for the sake of my sanity, I'm just gonna not bother with gender in the cat language dialect because it's just gonna be too much, and also it's very woke and trendy not to have. For example, Turkish, my paternal language, does not have gendered the nouns. You just say o if it's a he or a she, and if it's them, it's onlar. So if it's a couple of guys or a couple of girls, it doesn't matter like it does in Latin languages. You just say onlar, and that's the end of it. And it's the same for Hungarian, and I imagine Finnish, it's also not a European language, so probably gonna be for them as well. Let me know in the comments below if I'm wrong. And I would like, however, to have something that is not well developed in English, and that is courtesy pronouns and polite speech. I cannot tell you how much it irritates me that I'm not able to properly express respect and courtesy in the English language. And I've talked to Japanese people, to Indonesians, to Filipinos, to other Europeans, my students, strangers, anything. We all have a pet peeve with the English language because it makes us sound rude. Fudge. Okay? We don't like it. A lot of us don't like it. It feels unnatural and just rude, uncomfortable to be impolite when we're speaking to someone. So I'm definitely gonna have this in the cat language. I'm just gonna bring up a lot of medieval courtesy stuff. The reason I'm also justifying this in world, because it's very important. Just because you want something in your language doesn't mean it's gonna fit. So what you should always have in mind is, does it make sense in the story? And I imagine the cats, they're very snobbish, they're very precious, they feel like they're very important and have a big ego. Now, obviously, this is a human projecting these on a cat, but the cat might not feel that. I'm not trying to assume what it's feeling. At the moment, I doubt it's feeling as many feelings as a human just because of its limited brain power. But let's say that my assumptions are correct and that cats are indeed pretty preoccupied with courtesy, with respect, with hierarchy, then I think it would make sense to have courtesy pronouns for the cat language and also have a polite form of speech. In Japanese especially, this stuff is very well developed. For the Australian cat language, I'm only gonna have a formal and an informal form, but maybe for the Singapore dialect, I'm gonna have like more levels of courtesy like you have in Japanese. Now for the tenses, I think we can survive with just past, present, and future. Romanian language has mods and cases and bunch of stuff, and I mean, depending how you want to count tenses, they can be between 12 and 23 tenses. Yeah, English has less tenses, and I think we can do with even less than that. A lot of conlang YouTubers will recommend to cut from your language, not add more. So that's why I'm going for a more minimalist language. I mean, if the Japanese can survive with just two tenses, past and non-past, we can survive with three tenses, past, present, and future. I think it's more than enough. And also, there's the discussion of infinitive tense, which makes a verb to allows it to be used as a noun, as an adverb, and as an adjective. So to be or not to be is an example of the use of infinitive tense. And I think I'm gonna need that. So technically you would have four tenses. Excuse me, you would have four tenses, not three. I'm losing my voice. And it's good because it's the end of the video. So if you want to see examples of the language used narratively, where two cats are talking to each other, you can read up in my short stories, A Strange Encounter. Link is going to be in the description below. I'm still working on this language to better understand how grammar works, how pleasantly it is to listen to a language. And if you want to see a more case by case, like how each verb is conjugated, you can check out the previous video where I showed you my Excel spreadsheet and how I used all of that to kind of allow me to write a text, a dialogue between two cat characters. And if there's any other thing you want me to go in depth into, like if you want me to show you case by case examples of how it will be to have no declension, how to have courtesy pronouns, and how to maybe do the other dialects, let me know in the comments below. I love hearing from you, and this has been a very fun video, so I would definitely love to explore it further with you guys. So yeah, as always, if you want to help me out, subscribe, like, and comment to help the channel grow. Also, you can now become a member of the channel for some exclusive content. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You can find me on the following platforms. Like I said, you can support me on Ko-fi or on Tapastic. That Tapastic is where I have the stories, the comic books, everything posted. If you want to buy a hardcover, you can on Lulu. So yeah. Thank you so much, and see you in the next one. Bye bye.